Hello everyone and welcome. Today we bring you an epic science fiction story from the HFY universe. The quiet of deep space was a constant companion at Uranus Monitoring Station. It was a silence measured in light years, a stillness that seeped into the metal of the station and the bones of its crew. For Commander Alex Renner, it wasn't boring. It was a state of vigilant calm. His job was to watch the silent dance of gravitational waves and radiation signatures, to find the one note that was out of key in the grand, empty symphony. Most days, the symphony played the same tune. Today was different. It started as a flicker on his screen, a gravitational anomaly so faint it was nearly indistinguishable from background noise. While the station's automated systems flagged it as a probable sensor ghost, Renner leaned in. He had a reputation for seeing things others missed. He isolated the signal, running it through 3 different diagnostic filters. It wasn't a ghost. It was real, and it was wounded. Captain Rostova, Renner's voice was calm, cutting through the low hum of the bridge. I have an unscheduled contact at the system's edge. It's moving erratically, drifting. Before Captain Eva Rostova could reply, a second contact blazed into existence. This one was no ghost. It was a massive, angular warship, a shard of obsidian against the velvet black of space. It moved with the unfeeling precision of a predator, its trajectory perfectly calculated to intercept the first faltering signal. "There's your answer," Rostova said, her voice gravelly. She was a veteran of 2 border conflicts and trusted her gut more than any computer. "Looks like a pirate preying on a disabled freighter." Renner stared at the tactical display, his eyes tracing the paths of the 2 vessels. The larger ship wasn't closing in for a quick kill. It was flanking, making small, precise burns to guide the smaller vessel. His mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, saw the truth instantly. "They're not chasing it, Captain," Renner said, his tone sharpening with urgency. "They're herding it, pushing it into a clean kill zone away from any orbital debris. This isn't piracy. This is an execution." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Rostova looked from the screen to Renner, her eyes weighing his words. She had seen his unorthodox analysis prove right too many times to dismiss it now. The cold, calculated nature of the chase felt wrong. It was too clean, too patient. "I don't like bullies, Renner," she said finally. "What's our protocol for unconfirmed hostiles in sovereign space?" "Standard procedure is to issue a warning and demand clarification," Renner replied, his fingers already flying across his console. "Do it." A message was sent, a simple string of code and text identifying them as the Earth Defense Fleet and demanding the unknown cruiser state its intentions. The reply came back almost instantly. It was not text. It was a synthesized voice, cold and devoid of any emotion. Entity 734. "The disciplinary action against a failed asset is not your concern. Withdraw or you will be neutralized for impeding efficiency." The arrogance of the message sent a chill through the bridge. Entity 734. That was what it called humanity, an asset. Rostova's jaw tightened. "That's not a clarification," she said, her voice dangerously low. "That's a threat." "Renner, arm a warning torpedo." "Not a kill shot. I want to put a wall of energy between them." "Armed, Captain." "Fire." A single torpedo shot out from the station's defensive batteries. It didn't target either ship, instead detonating in the space between them. A brilliant, expanding sphere of plasma flared to life, a temporary sun in the darkness. It was a clear, unmistakable message. "We are here." "Back off." The hegemony cruiser stopped instantly. It hung in space for a full 10 seconds, its predatory silence more menacing than any attack. Then, a beam of energy, thin and blue, lanced out and swept over the Earth station, a comprehensive scan that cataloged every system, every weapon, every weakness. The scan finished. Without another word, the massive warship turned with impossible grace and vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind only the cold vacuum and its wounded prey. "They ran," a junior officer breathed, a note of relief in his voice. "No," Renner said quietly, watching his screen. "They didn't run. They gathered intelligence. They'll be back." He turned to the captain. "Ma'am, I recommend we bring the survivors' vessel into a secure docking bay." Rostova nodded. "My thoughts exactly." "Lead the contact team, Commander. Find out who we just saved." An hour later, Renner led a small security team through an airlock and into the refugee ship. The air was thin, filled with the smell of ozone and burnt metal. The ship's interior was a strange mix of catastrophic damage and ancient elegance. The walls were lined with graceful flowing patterns, now scorched and torn. They found the survivors huddled in the ship's central chamber. They were the lumen, a species Renner had only read about in xenology briefs. They were tall and slender, with skin that held a soft internal luminescence. There were only a dozen of them left. One of them stepped forward. She was a scientist, Renner guessed, or a leader. Her clothes were simple, but she carried herself with a profound dignity. This was Alara. Her eyes, large and dark, met his. In their depths, Renner saw a grief as deep as a nebula, but beneath it, a flicker of starlight that refused to be extinguished. She looked at Renner, then at his armed team, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she spoke. Her voice was a soft whisper, but it carried the weight of a dying star. "They are all gone," she said, "an entire world. Gone." In that moment, standing in the ruins of a forgotten ship at the edge of his own solar system, Alex Renner understood. This was not the end of a tragedy. It was the beginning of one. And humanity had just chosen its side. The message from the hegemony arrived 24 hours later. It wasn't broadcast to the public. It was delivered directly to the UN Security Council on a secure, encrypted channel. There was no face on the screen, only a stark, white symbol against a black background. The same synthesized voice they had heard before spoke, its tone flat and final. To the leadership of Entity 734. Your unsanctioned interference has been reviewed. The subjects you are harboring, designated Lumen, are a regressive species whose existence creates systemic instability. Their reclamation is a necessary measure for galactic cohesion. You will surrender the remaining Lumen assets within one standard rotation. You will also accept a hegemony overseer to ensure future compliance. Refusal will classify Earth as a hostile entity. This classification will result in your subjugation. There will be no further communication. The transmission ended. The room, filled with Earth's most powerful military and political leaders, was utterly silent. The message was not a declaration of war. It was an invoice, a bill for an act of compassion. In the hours that followed, Earth reached out to the other established powers in the galaxy. The responses were swift, polite, and chillingly similar. The Meridian Collective offered their deepest sympathies, but stated that their non-interventionist policies were absolute. The Arcturian Assembly sent a carefully worded message advising pragmatic compliance, citing the hegemony's overwhelming military and economic power. No one offered help. No one wanted to be next. Earth was alone. The decision fell to a handful of people in a single room, the weight of their species on their shoulders. They would not hand over the refugees. They would fight. For Alex Renner, the political storm was distant noise. His world had shrunk to a single, dimly lit data lab deep within the station. He and Alara worked in a state of focused intensity. There was no time for pleasantries, only a shared, desperate purpose. Alara, the keeper of her people's history, gave him everything. She unlocked the Lumen archives, a repository of knowledge stretching back millennia. It was a tragic library, its final chapters filled with defeat. "We fought them for 3 generations, Alara explained, her voice a low murmur as she brought up holographic battle schematics. They never made a mistake. Every attack was perfectly timed. Every fleet movement was flawless. We thought we were fighting soldiers. We were fighting an algorithm." Renner ignored the tactical overlays. He wasn't interested in how the Lumen had lost their battles. He was interested in how the hegemony had won them. He pulled up different files, after-action reports, damage assessments, engineering logs from salvaged Lumen ships. He spent days sifting through data that others would find meaningless energy fluctuations, heat signatures, structural integrity reports. "What are you looking for, Commander?" Ilara asked, watching him stare at a complex energy grid diagram for the 3rd straight hour. "A flaw," Renner said, not looking away from the screen. "Perfection is a myth. Every system has a weakness, a compromise made for the sake of something else. Theirs is efficiency. So what did they sacrifice to get it?" He found the pattern late on the 4th day. It was buried in a series of seemingly unrelated incident reports. A hegemony destroyer hit by a stray asteroid. A cruiser that took a lucky shot to its port side. A frigate damaged by a plasma storm. The events were different. The locations were different. The damage was different. But the result was the same. In each case, the hegemony ship didn't explode. It didn't lose one or two systems. The entire vessel went dark. A complete, instantaneous, system-wide power failure. He cross-referenced the reports, his heart beginning to beat faster. It was there, a single, consistent outcome from inconsistent causes. He brought up the schematics of a hegemony cruiser they had managed to partially scan before it retreated. He stripped away the layers of armor, weapons, and life support. He looked only at the power distribution network. And then he saw it. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a masterpiece of engineering. A single massive energy core at the heart of the ship, feeding a perfectly balanced, unified power grid. There were no independent circuits, no backup generators, no redundant systems. To a hegemony engineer, such things would be inefficient, a waste of space and energy. To Renner, it was the most beautiful flaw he had ever seen. He stood up, his mind racing. He had to tell Rostova. He found her on the command bridge, her face etched with worry. "Captain," he began, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "I think I've found it." He laid it all out for her, projecting the schematics and incident reports onto the main view screen. He pointed to the single power core, the unified grid, the reports of total system failure. They put all their eggs in one basket, Renner concluded. Their obsession with efficiency is their greatest weakness. Their ships don't have multiple independent systems like ours. They have one, it's a single point of failure. If we can disrupt the main power conduit, even for a millisecond, the core will perform an emergency shutdown to protect itself. The entire ship will go dead in the water. Captain Rostova stared at the screen, then back at Renner. The plan forming in his eyes was audacious, almost insane. It meant getting close enough to a vastly superior warship to hit a specific small target. The risks were astronomical, but it was the first glimmer of hope they'd had in days. "It's a theory, Renner," as she said, her voice cautious. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "But it's the only one we've got, and I'm willing to bet the lives of my crew that it's right." The hegemony's punitive fleet arrived exactly when their tactical models predicted it would. 5 cruisers and 10 frigates dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect, symmetrical formation. They were a wall of dark metal and glowing energy positioned just beyond Saturn's rings. Their message was clear. They had come to end this. Awaiting them was Earth's entire Third Fleet. It was a collection of older, less powerful ships, but they had one advantage, a plan born from desperation. On Renner's instruction, every ship had been retrofitted. Their standard torpedoes were replaced with specially designed armor-piercing missiles and heavy EMP warheads. The mission briefing had been simple and chilling. Get close, survive the initial volley, and aim for the heart of their power grid. The objective was not destruction. It was deactivation. "All ships, report status," Captain Rostova's voice echoed across the fleet-wide channel. One by one, the captains confirmed. They were ready. The battle began without warning. The hegemony fleet fired as one, a wave of incandescent energy that washed over Earth's defensive line. Shields flared, buckled, and failed. The frigate Valiant was hit first. Its reactor core breached in a silent, brilliant flash. 2 more ships went dark within the first minute. The comms channels filled with damage reports and frantic calls. "Draw their fire," Rostova commanded, her own ship shuddering from a near miss. "We need to break their formation. Give the strike teams an opening." It was a brutal, costly strategy. Earth's ships, smaller and more agile, scattered. They performed desperate, high-G maneuvers, forcing the hegemony's targeting AI to track multiple, unpredictable targets instead of a single unified line. They were bleeding ships and lives for every second they bought, for every meter of space they gained. The destroyer Dauntless, commanded by a young captain named Jin, saw his chance. A hegemony cruiser focused on tracking 3 other Earth ships had exposed its port side. It was a tiny window, and it would cost them everything to reach it. "All power to engines," Jin ordered, his voice steady despite the alarms blaring around him. "We're making the run." The Dauntless shot forward, a silver arrow aimed at the heart of a giant. It ignored the smaller frigates, focusing only on the cruiser. Hegemony point defense cannons swiveled, spitting a storm of plasma at the lone destroyer. The ship's armor glowed red, then white, as it absorbed the punishment. Bulkheads ruptured. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. But it held its course. They were in range. "Target their primary energy conduit," Jin yelled over the roar of failing systems. "Fire everything we have left." A single armor-piercing missile launched from the Dauntless's belly. It was a tiny speck against the colossal cruiser. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed to have been destroyed by the enemy's defenses. But it got through. It struck the cruiser's hull, not with a massive explosion, but with a dull metallic thud. For a second, nothing happened. Then the lights on the hegemony cruiser flickered. One by one, its weapon ports went dark. Its engine glow went from a brilliant blue to a dying ember, and then to nothing. The colossal warship, a machine of perfect death just moments before, was now a silent, powerless tomb, drifting lifelessly in the void. On the bridge of her flagship, Captain Rostova watched it happen. A stunned silence fell over the comms channel, quickly replaced by a wave of disbelief and elation. "He did it," she whispered. Renner was right. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. The hegemony's perfect formation wavered, their AI struggling to process an outcome that was not in its calculations. What was a tactical anomaly was now a viable strategy. "All ships!" Rostova's voice boomed with renewed strength. "You have your targets! Execute!" Inspired by the Dauntless's sacrifice, the rest of the fleet pressed the attack. They were no longer just surviving, they were hunting. Another cruiser went dark, then a frigate. The hegemony's flawless coordination shattered into confusion. Faced with a tactic they could not counter and a foe that refused to break, their cold logic arrived at a single, undeniable conclusion: retreat. As the remaining hegemony ships turned and vanished back into the void, the Third Fleet counted its losses. They had lost nearly a third of their ships. The cost was immense, but they had held the line. They had faced the most powerful force in the known galaxy and had forced them to flee. Humanity had won its first impossible victory. Victory celebrations on Earth were short-lived. The relief of survival was quickly replaced by the sobering reality of their losses. Memorials were erected, funerals were held, and the orbital shipyards worked tirelessly to repair the battered remnants of the Third Fleet. Humanity had won the battle, but everyone knew the war was far from over. In his lab, Alex Renner felt no sense of triumph. He felt the cold pressure of a ticking clock. He stood before Captain Rostova in the Security Council, his face grim. "They are not fools," Renner said, his voice echoing in the quiet briefing room. "They are a learning system. We exploited a design flaw. They will analyze their defeat, identify the flaw, and they will fix it. Their next generation of ships will have redundant power systems. This trick will not work a second time. We cannot win a direct war of attrition." His words hung in the air, extinguishing the last embers of celebration. He was right. They had won a single battle through a clever tactic, but the hegemony had the resources of 1,000 worlds. They could afford to lose ships. Earth could not. They needed a new strategy. Once again, Renner and Alara returned to the Lumen archives. This time, they didn't look at ship schematics or battle data. They looked at the arteries of the empire, trade routes, energy production reports, and logistical supply chains. Alara provided maps of the hegemony's expansion over the last century, while Renner looked for the patterns that underpinned it. "They don't conquer worlds in the traditional sense," Alara explained, highlighting a cluster of systems. "They absorb them. They identify a system's primary resource, take control of its production with superior technology, and make the local population dependent on them for everything else. Their control is economic." Renner focused on energy. "A fleet as massive as the hegemony's must consume staggering amounts of fuel." He traced the supply lines back from the front lines, through distribution hubs, all the way to their source. And there he found it. Another critical vulnerability born from their obsession with efficiency. The entire hegemony fleet in their sector was powered by a specific, highly refined isotope. This isotope was processed at only 3 massive automated refining stations, positioned in strategically secure locations. The entire supply chain was a masterpiece of just-in-time delivery. There were no large stockpiles, no significant reserves. Fuel was refined and immediately shipped to where it was needed. It was a system with zero waste and zero redundancy. "They didn't just build a fleet," Renner murmured, a new plan beginning to form in his mind. "They built a factory. And if you disrupt the factory's supply line, the assembly line grinds to a halt." He presented his new plan to the council. It was radical. It was a long-term strategy that ceded the initiative to the enemy, at least for a time. He called it Operation Starve the Beast. "We stopped fighting their warships. Renner explained, pointing to the map of the three refineries. We start fighting their supply tankers and their infrastructure. We don't need to win battles. We just need to make them run on empty. We conduct a campaign of guerrilla warfare, hitting their logistics, causing delays, and creating shortages. We starve their war machine until it collapses under its own weight. It was a strategy of patience and precision, a war fought in the shadows. The Council, seeing no other path to survival, gave him their approval. Earth couldn't fight this war alone. They needed information. Quietly, through encrypted back-channel communications, Earth's diplomats reached out. They didn't ask for warships or soldiers. They contacted shipping guilds whose routes had been seized by the hegemony. They spoke to mining consortiums that had been forced into unfair contracts. They spoke to species living on the fringes of hegemony space. They didn't ask for an alliance. They offered a trade, provide intelligence on hegemony shipping schedules and patrol routes, and in return, Earth would disrupt the operations of their common oppressor. Information began to trickle in. 2 months later, a lone Earth corvette, the Nightfall, dropped out of FTL near a remote gas giant. Hidden in the planet's turbulent atmosphere was one of the three critical refineries, a sprawling complex of automated machinery and storage tanks. The Nightfall was a new class of ship, built for speed and stealth, not for combat. Their mission was simple: avoid patrols, approach the station undetected, and destroy one specific target, the primary catalyst injector for the entire facility. Without it, the refinery would be unable to process the raw isotope into usable fuel for weeks. The approach was tense. They slipped past 2 hegemony patrols, their ship running on minimal power to mask its signature. They reached their firing position. "Target is locked," the weapons officer whispered. "Fire," the captain ordered. A single specialized torpedo shot from the Nightfall. It slammed into the base of the towering injector, breaching the structure. There was a bright flash, a plume of escaping gas, and then silence. The alarms on the station began to blare. "Mission accomplished," the captain said. "Get us out of here." The Nightfall turned and jumped to FTL just as the first hegemony response ships arrived. They left behind a crippled refinery and a war machine that was, for the first time, beginning to feel the pangs of hunger. The long campaign had begun. The strike on the first refinery was not an isolated event. It was the first note in a symphony of sabotage. In the months that followed, Earth's new stealth corvettes, nicknamed Phantoms by hegemony comms chatter, became a constant nagging threat across the sector. They never engaged in direct combat. They were ghosts, appearing from the darkness to strike at the Empire's vulnerable lifelines before vanishing again. A fuel tanker on a routine run to a forward base would suddenly lose its navigation and drift into an asteroid field. A convoy carrying replacement parts would find its route blockaded by a series of precisely detonated mining charges. The second of the 3 great refineries suffered a catastrophic coolant leak, engineered by a single Phantom that slipped past its defenses. The dominoes began to fall, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Hegemony communications, which Earth monitored constantly, started to change. Words like rationing, delay, and shortage began to appear in official fleet orders. The perfect, efficient machine was beginning to sputter. The first undeniable proof of their strategy's success came during a routine scouting mission. An Earth scout ship, the Wanderer, was detected by a hegemony patrol frigate. A chase ensued. The Wanderer was outgunned and slower, its shields failing under the frigate's precise fire. The hegemony ship closed in for the kill. On the bridge of the Wanderer, the captain prepared his crew for the end. Then the impossible happened. The hegemony frigate, its weapons glowing for the final shot, suddenly slowed. Its powerful engines sputtered, died, and then flared again at a fraction of their power. The frigate, a superior vessel in every way, broke off the chase. It had run out of fuel. The Wanderer's sensor logs were sent back to Earth and immediately disseminated through the growing intelligence network. The effect was electric. A hegemony warship had been forced to abandon a kill because it couldn't afford the fuel. The story spread like wildfire through the back channels of the galaxy. It was proof. The giant could bleed. Hope, a commodity more precious than any isotope, began to flourish in the shadows. For the leadership of the hegemony, these attacks were more than a nuisance. They were an insult. Their logical models could not account for an enemy that refused to fight a proper war. They were being bled dry by an inferior foe using tactics they considered cowardly and inefficient. Frustration turned to anger, and anger led to a single final solution. Their logic dictated that if the limbs of the rebellion could not be caught, they must strike at the heart. The order was given. The hegemony began to assemble an armada, the largest fleet the sector had ever witnessed. They pulled ships from garrison duties, stripped border patrols, and called in reserves from two neighboring sectors. Their strategy was simple and brutal: apply overwhelming, irresistible force to the source of the problem. They would travel to Earth, break its defenses, and scour the planet from orbit, ending the human infestation once and for all. They believed Earth's small fleet would never dare to face them in open battle. It was an enormous gamble, leaving much of their territory vulnerable, but they were certain it would be a decisive final move. But the hegemony's leaders were not the only ones watching. The other powers of the galaxy, the species and corporations that had watched from the sidelines, saw the pieces moving on the great board. They saw Earth's strategy succeeding, and now they saw the hegemony pushing all its chips to the center of the table. It was a moment of truth. To do nothing meant the certain destruction of Earth. The hegemony would then reestablish its dominance, harsher and more absolute than before, making an example of humanity for all to see. But to act now, while the enemy's forces were concentrated in a single fleet, with their supply lines already stretched to the breaking point, was a unique opportunity. It was a chance not just to save Earth, but to break the Empire's grip on the galaxy for good. The choice was made. The secret network of informants and sympathizers transformed. Encrypted messages that once carried shipping schedules now carried fleet compositions and military commitments. In hidden star systems and secret bases, warships began to gather. The Arturian Assembly, the Meridian Collective, and a dozen other smaller powers, united by their shared oppression and inspired by humanity's defiance, put aside their differences. The coalition of sovereign worlds was born. As the Great Hegemony Armada began its slow, confident journey toward Earth, the fleets of the new alliance began to move silently through the void, positioning themselves for the final decisive confrontation. The hegemony thought they were traveling to an execution. They were, in fact, flying into an ambush. The Hegemony Armada was a sight of terrible grandeur as it entered the Sol system. Hundreds of warships, a moving city of black metal, advanced with the cold confidence of an inevitable force. Their supreme commander, from the bridge of his flagship, watched Earth grow larger on the view screen. The final calculation had been made. The human anomaly would be corrected. His first indication that the calculation was flawed came as they passed the orbit of Jupiter. The fleet's automated logistical system reported that the forward supply depot they had established in the asteroid belt was offline. Destroyed. It was a minor inconvenience. They had more than enough fuel for the final assault. Then a second report came in. A reserve tanker convoy scheduled to rendezvous with them was also gone, vanished without a trace. A flicker of unease, an emotion his kind had long since engineered away, registered in the commander's mind. He checked their fuel reserves. They were sufficient for the attack and for holding orbit, but a return journey to their own territory was now questionable. They had come too far. The only logical path was forward. It was then that the trap was sprung, not with a volley of torpedoes, but with a flood of new contacts on the tactical display. From behind the moons of Jupiter, from the shadow of Saturn, from every dark corner of the system, warships dropped out of FTL. They were not just Earth ships. There were the sleek, silver vessels of the Meridian Collective, the powerful, blocky cruisers of the Arcturian Assembly, and dozens of other designs from species that were supposed to be neutral or too afraid to act. They didn't charge forward. They simply appeared, forming a vast, inescapable net around the hegemony fleet, cutting off any possibility of retreat. A single system-wide transmission opened. There was no grand speech, no challenge. It was the calm, measured voice of Commander Alex Renner. To the commander of the hegemony fleet, Renner began, his voice broadcast into every enemy bridge. Your tactical situation is as follows. You are surrounded. Your primary and secondary supply lines have been severed. Your current fuel reserves are insufficient for a sustained engagement or a return journey. You have no path of retreat. You have lost. He let the words sink in. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact. A holographic map appeared alongside his transmission, showing the Alliance fleet's positions, the destroyed supply depots, and the hegemony fleet's dwindling energy reserves. It was a cold, logical presentation of their own defeat. We are offering you terms, Renner continued. Power down your weapon systems. Surrender your vessels and your crews will be treated humanely. This is your only viable option. The choice is yours. On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship, the Supreme Commander stared at the map. His tactical AI was running trillions of simulations per second, and every single one ended in defeat. Defeat by starvation. Defeat by attrition. Defeat by 1,000 tiny cuts. There was no path to victory. The logic was undeniable. The human hadn't outfought him. He had outthought him. The order was given, a single bitter command sent throughout his fleet. Across the Sol system, the lights on hundreds of hegemony warships went dark. Their weapon ports powered down. Their engines cooled to a silent black. The greatest armada ever assembled surrendered without firing a single shot. The war ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, strategic suffocation. Days later, Renner stood in a stark white room aboard an Alliance station. Opposite him sat the Hegemony's Supreme Commander, stripped of his rank and authority. The commander looked at Renner, his face a mask of cold confusion. Our system was perfect, the commander stated, his voice a monotone. Our logic was flawless. Our models accounted for every variable. Why did we fail? Renner looked at the being who had tried to exterminate an entire species, who had threatened to do the same to his own. He felt no hatred, only a profound sense of pity. Your system was designed for maximum efficiency, Renner replied, his voice quiet. But you forgot that to survive, sometimes you need inefficiency. You need waste. You need redundancy. You need compassion to protect the parts of the system that seem weaker than yourself. Those are the things you eliminated, and that is what defeated you. The commander said nothing. The concept was beyond his comprehension. Months later, a new era had begun. The coalition of sovereign worlds was now the foundation of a new galactic community, one built on mutual respect and collective security. From the command deck of the newly commissioned Alliance Station Hope, Alex, Renner, and Alara looked out at the stars. Below them, ships from a dozen different species worked together, rebuilding, trading, and exploring. The cost had been high, the scars would remain for generations, but they had endured. They will write stories about this, Alara said softly, her own inner light seeming to burn a little brighter, about how humanity, the young emotional species, taught the galaxy a lesson. Renner nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant, swirling nebula where the first hegemony refinery had been destroyed. We just did what we had to, he said. We saw someone fall, and we offered a hand. The galaxy was different now. It was messier, less efficient, and far more uncertain. But for the first time in centuries, it was truly free. And that was a future worth fighting for.